Well, one of the most important things to remember about fraud is that fraud can happen anywhere at any time. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners says in their reports to the nation repeatedly that fraud is between 5 to 7% of revenues. And any company that would just look at their revenues and take, say, 6% of that and say, if I'm an average company with average controls and the average situation, that's how much I've lost to fraud in about the last 18 months. That's a scary proposition. The other thing that happens is, as Mike knows and has experience in, is that when it happens, they say, gee, this is the last person I thought it would be, and I'm the last person I thought would be a victim. Mm-hmm. So one key element about fraud is all managers, all people who have an interest in preventing fraud should realize that it can happen here, and therefore they need to take measures to make sure it doesn't happen here, or that if it does, that they catch it very early.
Yeah, one of the things is that management has to make sure that they're paying attention to their own records and books. So often we get comfortable with our business flowing and we get in such a comfort zone that we don't really stop and pay attention. In the moments when we stop and pay attention, we have to then say, in our business, what could be going on that may induce or invite fraud? And sometimes just the opportunity itself is a creation of the beginning.
For example, one of the things we encourage the smaller companies is to do this very thing, is to look through their payroll register occasionally, to look through their disbursements journal, to take the bank statements and look at those things. Because to be quite frank, the small company has an above average risk in terms of fraud happening. In the 2008 report to the nation from the ACFE, the size company with the greatest frequency of fraud was the less than 100. And the size company with the highest cost per fraud was the less than 100, and that was a $200,000 per fraud incident in those companies. So the smaller companies in particular have to really be on their toes because it can happen there more likely than even an average company. So that's why owner-managers are extremely important for them to do those kinds of things. And as we know and encourage our clients, you got to have some good segregation of duties. That's the real key. The one common component in fraud is a lack of segregation of duties and no compensating control. So the small company that hires one accountant, puts an absolute trust in them with no accountability, is actually a seedbed for fraud and really needs to reconsider whether they have proper controls in place.
Some of the things that they can watch out for during that is if they have a bookkeeper that maybe their behavior changes, or maybe some of the things in the office don't seem quite right. If the owner has a little bit of an inkling that something's not quite right, they may need to do a little more investigative research. Sometimes when the opportunity presents itself in these small environments of lack of internal controls, these frauds will start out very small because people think that the opportunity of them getting caught is very slim. That usually will start out very small but end up very large. And by the time the business owner finds it or sniffs it out, it can be too late. So what we try to do is say, make sure if you don't have segregation of duties, make sure you're looking at the accounting records very frequently, and make sure that you encourage your key employees to make sure they take vacation, make sure they're away so that others are looking back behind them, make sure that they're training others and engaging others in their activity, and to the extent that they're not doing those things, that could give you some warning to be careful of.
As Mike pointed out, the number one behavioral consideration of fraud is they start living beyond their means, and what you say, it relates to that. In other words, the fraudster tends to spend what they steal. And as you said, they start out small, they tend to escalate the crimes. At least the fraudsters who get caught tend to escalate the crime, tend to steal more money, tend to spend that money, and that generally shows up in their living style and their living behavior.
Yeah, and it tends to happen because they, over time, get a sense of entitlement that they have actually, in essence, become an owner. They work for the owners, and sometimes they see what the owners are making as form of compensation, but they don't understand that those owners are taking the risk of business. What they'll do is they'll get a sense of entitlement to where they think they have become the shareholders. And when that happens, it could be catastrophe.
And the most importantly for folks to remember is that a fraudster does not look like a crook. The white-collar criminal does not look like a blue-collar criminal, does not look like a crook, does not look like a jailbird. It looks like your best employee. They tend to be with you a long time. They tend to be very trustworthy, very loyal, have a great reputation. they're the last person that is expected to do something like this. And so to be on their toes is an understatement when it comes to fraud, because it can happen here, and if it does, it's going to be the person you least suspect. And that requires a lot of work on the part of management in order to prevent those kinds of things. And experts at Carvig's and Ingram, like Mike Scott, are able to help come in and do fraud investigations, fraud audits, and help owners, managers protect their books, whether it's before something happens or unfortunately after it happens.